This time each and every week, we are taking a look at the upcoming Major League Baseball season, going division by division, DFS, DraftKings SportsBook. We're covering all bases here, pun intended, I suppose, with Steve Buchanan, Garion, Thorne. I am Adam Kaufman. Today, it is the National League Central Division. And guys, the Cardinals, Buke, starting with you. You got them at plus 105, favored to win a very tight division. What do you expect here?
Yeah, we're excited about this team, huh? Not on that train. Not on that train at all. I mean, I don't even think we've done, 3 or 4 spring training games yet, and I'm already so sick of how overhyped this Cardinals team is already. Last season, they finished dead last in isolated power at 137, which was tied with the Pirates, that horrific Pirates team. They have the same isolated power. You look at the pitching after Jack Flaherty. Who do they have? Adam Wainwright? I think he's going to be 50 by the time the end of the season rolls around. And then look, they got Nolan Arenado. It's great. He's a very talented guy, but let's also remember half of his games came in Coors Field. He was atrocious on the road last year. Will that continue this year? We have yet to see. It was a big move. Don't get me wrong, but come on. Nolan Arenado is going to put this team over the top. They have way too many glaring holes to be super excited about the Cardinals.
Gary, and I'd ask you if you're more excited about the Cards than Steve, but I'm not sure there's any way that's not possible.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not really excited about them, but I'd have to be more excited, I guess. And the projection systems are equally just sort of nonplussed with this team. Pacoda has them at 81 wins. Fangraphs have them at 80. I get that this division is very much up in the air, but it's just really hard to take the favorite in a division that I think is basically a coin flip that comes down to, even if you want to throw in the Cubs, which I'm maybe not willing to do, but at least 3 teams have a legitimate chance to win this division. I'm not going to take the one that's only paying plus 105. And for a lot of the reasons Steve laid out, I mean, this has been a very below average offensive team. And even if you don't want to use the small sample size of last season, they only had a 93 WRC plus in 2019, 94 WRC plus last season. They can't really hit. And as Steve mentioned, they added a hitter who could only hit in Colorado, which is not where St. Louis is located. So that's a bit of an issue. They don't have pitching. And I mean, what are we really banking on here? What is the path to St. Louis winning this division? Basically, you have to have both Dylan Carlson and Tyler O'Neill break out and be like the 95th percentile prospects we thought they could be at some point. Maybe one does it. I don't think both do it. And that doesn't solve the pitching issues. So I am steering clear of this bet entirely.
Let's stay with you here, Gary, and talk about Nolan Arenado. And obviously, you've both acknowledged the fact that, yeah, good player, but might not be the same guy in St. Louis as he was in Colorado. Even still, NL MVP DK Sportsbook has him at plus 1,200 odds. How do you feel about it?
I guess I see how they got there. I mean, if you're going to have the Cardinals as the favorites to win the Central, I guess the narrative is new guy in town, leads the Cardinals to a division crown. He's the best player on the team. He's a possible candidate for NL MVP. He's also, this shouldn't be ignored as we talk about the bat traveling to St. Louis. The glove's going to travel. He was a 99th percentile outs above average guy last season. You need to be a immaculate defender to win the MVP, especially with how a lot of voters are using WAR in the advanced sabermetrics we have now. So that's nice. But going back to the start of 2018, we've got a sample of over 750 plate appearances for Arenado, not in Colorado. And he's the picture of an average major league hitter. He's got an ISO just above 200. He's got a 106 WRC plus. He's just not going to do enough with the bat to win this award. So no, I won't be taking part in this either.
Bukes, are you at least more of a believer in Arenado than you are the Cards as a whole?
I mean, look, Garion kind of laid it out perfectly. And here's the big difference for me. Look at the American League MVP odds. It's Mike Trout at plus 200, and then the rest of the field. Alex Bregman is next at 10-1. Horrible bet, by the way. Don't take that. That's just a horrific odds. But then you look at the National League. 5 players, 5, are at plus 850 or less. Mookie Betts, Juan Soto, Cody Bellinger, Ronald Acuna Jr., and Fernando Tatis Jr. So Arenado has to beat all of these guys out. And that is just simply not going to happen. You're getting some decent value here. But again, we're talking about a guy who's been average at best on the road and, kind of on the road all the time now when you think of his time over in Colorado. So I don't like the odds at all. Do I think he's going to succeed in St. Louis? Sure. He's by far their best hitter there, aside from Paul Goldschmidt. Is he good enough to be the MVP? Absolutely not.
Bukes, disappointing year last season. The pandemic shortened campaign for the Milwaukee Brewers, sub 500. I don't think maybe that surprised anybody, but nevertheless, pitching a strength, hitting not so much. Can they get enough at the plate to overcome their woes last season?
So I think an underrated move this season was the Brewers getting Colton Wong. I mean, the leadoff spot for the Brewers was actually one of the worst in the league. He's a solid on base guy, 350 on base percentage at least over the past 2 seasons. And you look at what the Brewers did out of the leadoff spot last year, 299 on base percentage. That was one of the worst in the league. So now you're getting a guy who can get on base, who doesn't strike out much at the top of the lineup there. It's going to make a big difference. But after that, it's a lot of question marks. This is why this division is so wide open. Yes, the pitching is okay. Let's not get too excited about the Brewers pitching staff, but they can do enough. But we need to see some other guys come into form. We'll talk about them in a second, like Christian Yelich and such. So not crazy about this year, but at least they made a good move to kind of get the table set with Colton Wong. I think that was a very underrated move this offseason.
Garion, any confidence in Milwaukee's bats?
I wouldn't say confidence, but I would say that I'm a lot more optimistic that someone like Yelich bounces back and is an MVP version of himself than, Nolan Arenado moving to St. Louis and being an MVP version of himself. And that's obviously a huge step towards the Brewers being a relevant team. And I think these odds are pretty good at plus 300 on the DK Sportsbook. The one thing I really like about this team, aside from the bullpen, because you could make the case they have the 2 best relievers in the National League in Josh Hader and Devin Williams. And that comes into play, especially with how bullpens have just been, the impact they have on games now is unprecedented. But Steve mentioned Colton Wong and how that sort of solidifies the top of their order. Not only does it do that, it gives them arguably one of the best defensive teams in all of baseball, because not only are you adding Colton Wong, you're also re-adding Lorenzo Cain, who only played 5 games last season. Lorenzo Cain is getting older, so maybe take this stat with a grain of salt, but even in his age 33 season in 2019, 22 defensive runs saved in center field. You've now got him in center. Colton Wong was a Gold Glove second baseman at second, and Orlando Arcia is going to either be playing shortstop or third base. I know he's taking reps at both right now in spring training. You build defense up the middle of the diamond. That is a great defensive team, and some people overlook defense. I get it. It's not like a sexy thing to talk about, but talk to the Tampa Bay Rays about how important defense can be and how that can lead to winning games. So I kind of like them as the dark horse in the NL Central.
You both acknowledge Christian Yelich, not great last year, obviously. So everyone hoping for a bounce back, most especially him and that Brewers organization. But Garion, you have Yelich ranked at number 9 on the MLB top 100 right now list going into the season. How close are we, or what needs to happen for him to return to being a must fantasy start again?
I'm not sure if there's a specific tweak he has to make. I think he's just one of those guys who I know it's a generalization, but I'm going to put him in the bucket of 2020 was just a weird year, and we got a weird version of Christian Yelich. Now, I do think you can look at where his ground ball rate was again last season, up back above 50%, and say that, look, 2019 was the outlier. He's not a guy who's going to hit more fly balls than ground balls. That's maybe not the best from a fantasy perspective, but from a real life perspective where he adds value, that's fine. Because he's someone who, you look at zone contact rate, he was at 88%, 88%, 87%, 88%, the 4 seasons coming into last year. Suddenly he drops down to 81.9%. He's striking out 30% of the time. But you look at the 12 qualified hitters in baseball who had a strikeout rate above 30%. He has the lowest swinging strike rate by a wide margin, and he has the lowest O-swing rate by an even wider margin. Like, it's crazy how much of an outlier it looks like his last season was. So I think he's just going to bounce back. I think he's a better hitter than this, and I think you can just chalk it up to small sample size.
Are you with that, Bukes? 2020 was an anomaly?
I was kind of chuckling here because I also mentioned how, had an uptick in his ground balls last year, but there really wasn't anything that was like, okay, this is the reason. Like, he wasn't chasing pitches out of the zone or anything like that. I think it was just a slump. But let's not forget either, he was still on pace. If this was a full season, he was still on pace for over 30 home runs. So if you want to call that a bad year, I'll take that any day. I'll still hit 30 home runs. Obviously his batting average wasn't great or anything like that. His power numbers weren't good, but I think it was just a bad year for him. He's consistently produced all throughout his career. 2020 was not a year that we're going to go back to 50 years from now and go, oh, look what happened to him in 2020. It's just going to be almost kind of erased from the mind. So I'm not taking too much stock into this. Christian Yelich will be fine.
Bukes, we spent some of the offseason wondering for the Reds, will Sonny Gray get traded? Will Luis Castillo get traded? Well, it turns out two of the top pitchers there for Cincinnati still around, and it's fair to wonder, obviously, if this Reds team is going to go anywhere in 2021. What are your expectations?
You know, coming into the last season, kind of felt like the Reds were going for it all. Like they made the moves. They had a sexy lineup on paper. I was a big backer of them. That kind of blew up in our face. But I think the first couple months are going to be very telling because this is a team that, even though they were trying to go for it all last year, I feel like they're on the cusp of a rebuild. And you look at that, some of their contracts that they have right now, they have a brutal contract still left for Joey Votto. They owe him $95 million over the next 4 years with a full no trade clause. Whoops, probably shouldn't have done that one. But you look at guys like Sonny Gray and Luis Castillo, they're very affordable assets for teams that are going to be in contention once the All-Star break rolls around. $10 million for Gray, $4.2 million for Luis Castillo. Castillo specifically under team control until 2024 when he becomes an unrestricted free agent at age 31. So I feel like the Reds are basically going, how do we look when June 1st comes around? And that's going to dictate where this team is going to go. They get off to a slow start. They're absolutely going to be sellers at the deadline.
Garion, as Buke said, couple months to kind of wait and see, feel things out here for the Reds once the season gets going. Well, a couple months, that was last season. That was the entirety of the thing. So how do we get this team above 500 this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, like Steve said, about a hot start because they can go a lot of different ways with this. I'm taking sort of if there's smoke, there's fire approach to just the amount of rumors we heard about Castillo and Gray this offseason. Like, I know their GM came out and said, like, those guys will be Reds this season, but that stuff doesn't happen without there being some sort of conversations being had. So, like Steve said, if they get off to a rough start, those guys are clearly on the table to get future assets, and that's kind of what the Reds have been known for. Their lineup is a little strange. They've got so much power potential. They probably have more power potential than 90% of lineups in baseball, but at the same time, they've also got the potential, as we saw in the playoffs, to just not score any runs because sometimes the ball doesn't leave the park. And maybe they're one of the teams most hurt by the new baseball if that really does play a big factor in home runs and home run to fly ball ratio and things like that. But, Gray, Castillo, Molly, maybe Nick Lodolo comes up mid-season. Like that's the makings of a really good rotation. So I can see it happening. But I've got more faith in the Brewers keeping their team together this year. So I think that's the better bet for me.
DK Sportsbook, Garion, has the Reds at 82.5 wins this season, which is perfectly mediocre, quite frankly. So, for this team to obviously get over the hump, you going over or under?
I'm going to take the under. And I think I'm going to do that because, again, there's a lot of variables with this team. They need a couple things to go right to get over this number. And even if those things go right, there's no necessary guarantee that they're going to have 83, 84, 85 wins. Also, to kind of tie up my last point with the Brewers, this could be the worst defensive team in baseball. They are atrocious at every spot on the diamond. And their only change, really, to last year's defensive unit was extracting Freddie Galvis from shortstop, their only good defender, and replacing him with, like, no one, basically. Like, I think Kyle Farmer is who we have penciled in right now, and he has 86 career innings at shortstop. At shortstop, like the key defensive position on a baseball field. So, I mean, things could get hairy really fast. Like, even Luis Castillo, like, ground ball pitcher, not a great thing to be when you have this infield playing behind you.
Steve, we haven't seen the Reds hit 83 wins in almost a decade. Will this be the year?
I don't think this is going to be the year. And quite frankly, this is a bet I'm just steering clear from. Like, the Reds are the National League version of the Athletics for me. If they get off to that slow start, they're going to start selling off assets because they need to go more youthful. And according to the DraftKings Sportsbook, if you're going to win this division, it doesn't sound like you're going to even need 90 wins to do so because the Cardinals have the highest projected win total here, and they're at 86.5. So for me, this could be a division where any team could potentially sneak in, except the Pirates, because they're a disaster. But the Reds and Brewers are at 82.5. The Cubs are at 78.5. Like, it doesn't sound like it's going to be a very competitive division. It's really just a matter of who gets hot at the right time. So at that win total, they could honestly easily go over. But if that slow start happens in the beginning of the year, like I said, they're going to sell off those assets and they're going to be a team that's going to be under 500. So they're right at that cusp already. That slow start would just solidify that. So I would be on the under for this one.
You just mentioned it. The Chicago Cubs projected anyway to go sub 500 after winning the division last year. Yu Darvish is gone. There's still lots of talent there for Chicago. So what needs to happen for this team to be above that break-even point?
So here's the thing. The Cubs have a stellar lineup. Like they literally have 4 or 5 guys that could hit at least 30 home runs. And the addition of Jock Peterson kind of puts them into that group where they have 4 or 5 guys that could do that. The problem is they're also going to give up about 30 runs per game. You look at that rotation, like that is a double-A rotation. It feels like. Let's just say the Cubs made the playoffs and they're in a 3-game series. They'd be rolling out Kyle Hendricks, Zach Davies, and I don't know, Jake Arrieta. Like, ooh, that's a free pass for whomever they're facing to advance to the next round. If that's the rotation they're going to throw out to them. So barring some big move during the season or at the trade deadline, this team is not going to go very far because their pitching is not going to be able to sustain how much offense that their lineup is giving, but the pitching is just going to give it right back. And the bullpen is not going to do them any favors either. So great lineup. They are desperate need of pitching help, and it's not going to come from anywhere, from the minors, from the bullpen, whatever. So they're going to be a team that you can beat up on.
30 runs a game, not great, Garion.
No, pretty bad, but I would say an accurate projection of what this rotation could be. It is slim pickings. It gets gross after Kyle Hendricks. And even Hendricks, like someone who's not, your prototypical strikeout, mitigating contact kind of pitcher. He's worked his magic for long enough now where you just believe in it. But I mean, you asked what has to go right for this team to win the division. I think Steve basically outlined it. It's Jake Arrieta has to turn back the clock about 6 years, and Davies has to continue to just completely obliterate FIP and XFIP expectations of how he's pitching. I don't think both of those things are going to happen. And all the projection systems agree. If you look at Steamer, they have 5 Cubs pitchers projected with 20 starts this season. Aside from Hendricks, none of those 4 guys have an ERA below 4.8.
Oh boy.
It's bad. And this is a season too. Again, we are coming off a 2020 campaign where no one threw more than like 75 innings. So pitchers are going to be treated with kid gloves this year. So who's their 6th guy? Who's their 7th guy? Like this could get disgusting. So I just don't think they're going to score enough runs.
Let's move to the Pirates, guys. Reluctantly, I suppose. We have to talk about this team, Garion, and not projected to do a whole lot in the standings, as we know. Those other teams that we talked about already, all with a shot at least to win the division. Pittsburgh, full rebuild mode. Ke'Bryan Hayes, he's got a couple of things going for him. One, he might be the only person in the world named Ke'Bryan. And 2, plus 400 odds to win Rookie of the Year in the National League. Can he get there?
Well, he's got another thing going in his advantage. His clock has already started, which means the Pirates, there's not a lot of guys on this team who we can say if he's healthy, he's going to play 162 games. But the Pirates have no reason but to stick him out there and see what he can do. And another thing going for him, it's not as important when it comes to Rookie of the Year as it is for MVP, but he is a potential Gold Glove, Nolan Arenado level defensive third baseman. So he's going to at least be giving it to you on one side of the baseball. And, he's not going to have a 450 BABIP this year. And he's someone who struggled at AAA to hit. Like that's been the big question mark. So I do have concerns about his bat and whether that can carry him to an award like this. But among position players in the National League, he has the clearest path to 650 plate appearances, which is important. That volume means something. But I still think I like someone like Ian Anderson at plus 800 a little bit better. Like he's just going to be playing for a team that's competing for their division, competing for a World Series. And I think that's going to end up meaning more in the eyes of voters. So I'd probably steer away from the favorite here.
You think Hayes will excel there, Bukes?
Yeah. You look at the makeup that he had last year. It looks like an impact player, but the short stint the numbers he put up was a bit unsustainable, like 5 home runs and like I think it was 24 games that he played. Like that's not really the type of player that we saw in the minors. He has power, don't get me wrong, but like that's not the pace that you're going to see from him consistently. And then once pitchers start to get acclimated to him, how do they start adjusting pitching to him? Is Hayes able to adjust to what they're adjusting to? That's going to be the big question here from me. And then also, quite frankly, it's not like he has a lot of protection in that lineup either, even if he starts hitting well. So it's an easy free pass too. If it's like, look who's batting below him or above him, there's no one you really fear in that Pirates lineup. So there's a lot going against him too as well. But at least from a talent perspective, at least there's something the Pirate fans can watch during the season.
Bukes, DK Sportsbook has the Pirates at 58.5 wins, which last year would have been sensational. This year, not so much.
Yeah, I mean, maybe remove the 8 from that number, and that's the win total that you can maybe project for the Pirates this season. But, there's a reason why the under their win total has the most juice out of all the win totals on the board at -130. This team is absolutely going nowhere. Like, there's a rebuild mode, and then there's like something after rebuild, and that's what the Pirates are doing right now. It's like there is no path to any type of competitiveness for years to come, it feels like. So in no way would I want to take the over on this one. Granted, I'm the person who was highly touting, taking the over on the Marlins, which hit, by the way. You're welcome, everybody. But this is not one that like you want to be bold on and be like, I'm taking the over on the Pirates win total. Imagine trying to sweat that out for 6 or 7 months. Like, what an atrocious bet to take. Take the under if you want. Otherwise, just steer clear of this one.
How about you there, Thorne? Over or under?
Yeah, I'm going to go under. And I think we can all agree that baseball, I mean, it's been weird with the way money's been handed out in free agency the last couple of years and how stingy some teams appear to be. And it's kind of the last 3 years we've gotten to a point where the tanking model has sort of crept into Major League Baseball. And you go back to 2018, 2019 combined, we had 7 teams lose at least 100 games in those 2 seasons. And I think the Pirates are a shoo-in to lose 100 games this year. That doesn't quite get them to this number, granted, but I'm looking at like 109, 110 losses this season for this team. Their pitching is absolutely terrible. And anyone good, like there is no way that Polanco is still on this team in August. Any reliever who comes out and pitches really well in the first 2 months of the season will be traded for some sort of future compensation. Like this team is going to be, they're already unrecognizable. I'm not even going to know 4 players on this roster by the time August rolls around. So
I don't now.
Yeah, like it's crazy to think how much worse this could get. So yeah, there's no way I think this team wins 59 games.
Last one for you, Gary. And speaking of pitching, which player do you think just across this division will have the biggest DFS impact this season?
So I think the DFS aspect is important here because you could make a case that like Flaherty is always a huge pitcher. He's actually probably the one being drafted the highest right now out of all NL Central pitchers. But DFS, it's got to be Corbin Burns or it's got to be Brandon Woodruff with Milwaukee because they strike out everyone. And the big question mark with both those guys is, can they pitch more than 20 times in a full season? And they don't have to in DFS. If they ain't starting, you don't care. So I think from a DFS perspective, those 2 guys are just the perfect archetype of pitcher, the guys you look for every single time a slate opens up.
What do you like, Bukes?
I don't even know what the slate looks like for like April 3rd, but I guarantee you are not drafting anybody from the NL Central for your DFS lineup. Like this is not a strong division for pitching for a DFS purpose. Like Garion mentioned, Woodruff, Burns, Flaherty, that's probably it. Like there really is not a lot of pitching in this division. Kim from the Cardinals might be someone that you can look at. He has some nice upside, I think, but man, this is a brutal division for pitching. Certainly not from the Pirates, certainly not from the Cubs. So we're already down to 3 teams already. DFS wise, it's going to be Woodruff. It's going to be Burns. It's going to be Flaherty.
Isn't that a law firm? Woodruff, Burns, and Flaherty?
Somewhere in the Northwest.
Yeah, just close this segment, please. Thank you.
All right. Division tour continues this time next week. Gary, happy birthday, buddy.
Thanks, man.